The storm outside rattled the windows, but inside the cramped apartment, two women leaned over a glowing laptop. Empty coffee mugs and half-eaten pizza cluttered the table. On the screen was a single document titled, Founder's Pledge. 50-50, Gianna Carter said firmly, her dark eyes unwavering. At 29, she carried herself like someone twice her age, precise and deliberate. Numbers were her armor. Logic was her weapon. Equal shares. Equal control. If we're building something this big, we stand as equals, or we don't build at all. Across from her, Penny Dawson twirled a pen between manicured fingers, golden curls bouncing as she leaned back. She was 5 years older, louder, hungrier. Born from nothing, she wore her ambition like a crown. 50-50, she echoed, signing with a flourish. We'll build an empire, Gia. And the world will know our names. In that tiny room, with nothing but ambition to their credit, NovaSphere Technologies was born. The spark. The idea was simple, a cloud security platform so seamless, companies wouldn't even notice it working. Invisible, unbreakable, essential. Gianna had run the numbers until dawn, the market potential was staggering. Penny painted it as a revolution that would make the internet safe again. Together, they were unstoppable. Gianna, the strategist, drafted the business plan down to the decimal. Penny, the charmer, spun those numbers into a story that dazzled investors. Where Gianna saw equations, Penny saw headlines. Where Gianna dissected risk, Penny promised glory. They were opposites, yet in those early days, the differences made them powerful. The struggle. They lived on ramen and dreams. Their first pitch was in a cafe, to an investor who barely listened. Their second was in a conference room where Gianna's meticulous charts earned polite nods, but no check. Penny called it practice. But they didn't quit. They coded at dawn, tested servers at midnight, and celebrated their first paying customer with a $6 bottle of sparkling wine. NovaSphere began to grow. And with growth came visibility. The first spotlight. At a local startup mixer, a journalist shoved a recorder toward Penny. "You're the founder of NovaSphere, right?" Penny flashed her flawless smile. "Yes. Co-founder. And CEO." The next morning's article featured Penny's photo beneath the headline, Penny Dawson, the visionary behind Silicon Valley's next big thing. Gianna's name was buried in the second paragraph. When Gianna showed her the article, Penny only shrugged. "It's just press, Gia. You hate the spotlight anyway. Let me handle it." Gianna nodded, but a seed of unease took root. The first divide. They formalized their roles soon after. Gianna became CFO, managing finances and risk. Penny assumed the title of CEO, the face of the company. "This way," Penny said brightly, "you can build without distraction, and I can sell the dream." It made sense. At least, it seemed to. But the next investor meeting exposed the imbalance. Gianna laid out their 5-year projections with calm authority. Questions about margins, churn rates, and scaling were answered with flawless precision. Investors nodded, impressed. Then Penny rose for the closing. Her voice was silk, her story effortless. She spoke about her humble beginnings, her relentless drive, the vision that kept her awake at night. By the end, the investors were leaning forward, hanging on her every word. The check came through the next morning. The headline read, "Dawson secures major backing for NovaSphere." Gianna forced a smile. Penny forced nothing, she basked. Victor enters. With new money came new complexity. Contracts, clauses, compliance. That was when Penny introduced Victor Hale. "He's a Harvard lawyer," Penny said, sliding a business card across the table. "Smart. Connected. Exactly what we need." Gianna studied the card but didn't look up. We can't afford someone like this. Let me worry about that, Penny replied, already texting. Victor will make sure we don't get buried in fine print. Victor appeared at their next meeting, tall, composed, his tailored suit whispering power. He shook Gianna's hand, but his eyes lingered on Penny. NovaSphere has potential, he said smoothly. But potential only matters if it's protected. It sounded like a promise. It felt like a warning. The elevator moment. Weeks later, they stood together in Hawthorne Capital's glass tower, minutes after landing their first multi-million-dollar investment. Cameras flashed as Penny gripped the managing partner's hand, smiling like she'd been born for it. Gianna stood slightly behind, documents clutched to her chest, unseen by the lens. In the mirrored elevator, Gianna caught their reflection, Penny glowing in the spotlight, Gianna shadowed beside her. We did it, Penny whispered, eyes sparkling. Gianna exhaled, but the words that rose in her throat were different, for now. That night, as San Francisco's skyline glittered outside their tiny office, the two women clinked glasses again. To the outside world, they were partners. To each other, they were sisters in ambition. But somewhere in the shadows, between Penny's craving for the spotlight, Victor's sharp eyes, and Gianna's unwavering need for fairness, the seeds of betrayal had already been planted. And soon, they would grow. The glass tower of NovaSphere Technologies gleamed against the San Francisco skyline like a promise. What had once been two women in a cramped apartment with laptops and takeout boxes had exploded into a company everyone in Silicon Valley was talking about. Gianna Carter stood in the center of it all, her dark hair pulled back, eyes sharp as she moved across the polished floor of the new headquarters. She carried the kind of quiet confidence that made investors lean forward in their chairs. Numbers were her kingdom, balance sheets, projections, financial models that made even the most skeptical venture capitalists nod. Beside her, Penny Dawson sparkled in a very different way. Cameras loved her. With her golden curls, designer suits, and perfectly rehearsed sound bites, Penny had become the public face of NovaSphere. Investors called her charismatic. The press labeled her the new queen of tech. And Penny thrived on every headline, every photo op, every magazine cover that asked if she was the next big thing. It worked, at least for a while. The first big break came with a deal that no one thought they could land, a multi-million-dollar investment from Hawthorne Capital. Gianna had stayed up for 3 nights perfecting the financial model, making sure every detail was airtight. When the meeting began, she laid out the numbers with calm precision. She explained how NovaSphere's cloud security platform could dominate the market within 5 years, how the margins would grow, how the risk was mitigated. But when the contract was signed and the cameras flashed, it was Penny who stood in front of the banner, shaking hands with Hawthorne's executives, her smile splashed across the next morning's Wall Street Journal. Gianna didn't complain. She told herself it didn't matter whose face was in the paper, as long as NovaSphere had the funding to grow. She believed in the partnership, believed Penny's shine complemented her substance. What Gianna didn't notice, or maybe didn't want to notice, was the flicker in Penny's eyes during that photo shoot. The way Penny held the pen a second longer than necessary, as if savoring the moment of being the center of attention. Months passed, and NovaSphere's growth was unstoppable. Their office doubled in size. They recruited top engineers from Google and Amazon. Their valuation soared past $500 million. Gianna poured herself into the numbers, keeping the company's foundation strong. Penny, meanwhile, cultivated investors and charmed the press, always dressed to perfection, always the story everyone wanted to hear. People love her, one investor whispered to Gianna after a board meeting. She's magnetic. Gianna smiled politely, but deep down she felt a sting. She had built the architecture of NovaSphere's success, brick by brick, but it was Penny who received the applause. The first crack appeared during a press conference. A reporter asked a direct question about NovaSphere's new financial strategy, a strategy Gianna had written herself. But before she could open her mouth, Penny stepped in with a polished answer, using Gianna's words almost verbatim. The crowd clapped, pens scribbled, cameras clicked. Gianna froze. Penny had stolen her script. Afterward, in the corridor, Gianna confronted her. "You could have let me speak." Penny laughed lightly, adjusting her diamond bracelet. "Oh, come on, Gia. You hate the cameras. I saved you the trouble." "It wasn't trouble. It was my work." Penny's smile sharpened. "And it's our company. Don't be so sensitive." The conversation ended there, but for Gianna, something shifted. Still, she tried to brush it off. Their partnership had weathered worse storms. And wasn't Penny right? Gianna wasn't a performer, she was a strategist. Let Penny play the star while she played the architect. That's what she told herself. But Victor Hale, NovaSphere's new legal advisor, saw the tension. He was often in the background during board meetings, sharp in his tailored suits, taking notes in silence. Gianna noticed the way Penny leaned toward him after discussions, the way they exchanged glances. She assumed it was professional. She didn't yet realize Victor was already sketching out the legal frameworks that would one day cut her out entirely. The climax of NovaSphere's early success came at the Tech Vision Awards. Penny, dazzling in a crimson gown, walked onto the stage to accept Startup of the Year. She gave a speech about vision, innovation, and courage. She never mentioned Gianna's name once. Gianna sat in the audience, clapping like everyone else, but her chest burned. For the first time, she wondered if she had made a mistake trusting Penny. As Penny raised the crystal trophy high above her head, photographers snapping from every angle, Victor Hale leaned in from the shadows, whispering something that made Penny laugh softly. Gianna didn't hear the words. But in that moment, she felt it, the beginning of a betrayal she hadn't yet seen coming, a betrayal already blooming behind the glittering smiles and flashing lights. Gianna Carter stared at the glowing skyline outside NovaSphere's office windows late into the night. The city was alive, but inside the boardroom, she felt the cold silence of absence. Another strategic meeting had ended without her, called at the last minute, scheduled while she was across town negotiating with suppliers. At first, she brushed it off. Meetings shifted all the time. But the pattern repeated, whispered gatherings behind closed doors, conference calls where her name wasn't on the invite list, decisions announced after they had already been made. And the common thread in every one of them? Penny Dawson. It began innocently enough. Penny started holding informal updates with board members. She framed it as casual networking, drinks after hours, private dinners, even a luxury weekend retreat in Napa. But when the minutes from the next board meeting arrived, Gianna noticed subtle shifts in voting patterns. Proposals she had carefully outlined were delayed or dismissed, while Penny's pet projects, flashy but financially reckless, were approved without question. The explanation was always the same: the board is aligned with Penny's vision. Gianna clenched her jaw. It wasn't vision. It was manipulation. Victor Hale was the quiet architect behind it all. He had slipped into NovaSphere's ecosystem like a shadow, introduced by Penny as a brilliant legal strategist. On the surface, he was just that, precise, composed, his every word measured. But behind the veneer of professionalism, Victor was busy rewriting NovaSphere's foundation. Shareholder agreements, equity clauses, bylaws that had once given Gianna equal power with Penny were being amended, subtly, quietly, with just enough legal jargon to bury the consequences. Gianna noticed one evening while combing through the company's updated charter. A clause she had never approved now required a supermajority for major decisions. Another granted executive discretion for certain financial authorizations, discretion that lay solely in Penny's hands. Her stomach turned. She felt like someone had reached into her chest and stolen her heartbeat. When she confronted Penny, the conversation was wrapped in sugar but edged with steel. "Why wasn't I informed about the amendments?" Gianna asked, documents spread across her desk. Penny leaned against the doorway, her tone breezy. "Victor advised it was cleaner this way. You know how messy shareholder disputes can get." "Messy? You rewrote our voting structure. Do you even realize what that means?" Penny's smile didn't falter. "It means we can move faster. Investors hate gridlock, Gia. Don't overthink it." Gianna's hands trembled. "You cut my authority in half." "Correction," Penny replied smoothly, adjusting her silk blouse. "I aligned it with mine. This company needs a single, decisive voice. You've always hated the spotlight. Well, I don't. Let me handle the weight." The words hung in the air like a blade. Behind closed doors, Penny's contempt grew sharper. "She's brilliant, yes," Penny told Victor one evening over a bottle of wine in his penthouse. "But brilliance in the shadows doesn't matter. People want a leader they can see, someone who commands attention. That's me. Not her." Victor smirked, swirling his glass. "And you're ready to cut the cord?" "I'm ready," Penny said, her eyes gleaming. "But it has to be clean. No mess, no lawsuits that can drag me down." "That's where you come in." Victor leaned forward, voice low. "Then we'll start building the cage. By the time she realizes she's trapped, the door will already be locked." Meanwhile, Gianna fought to keep the company stable. She worked longer hours, triple-checking finances, finding ways to stretch resources. But she couldn't ignore the chill in the hallways. Engineers who once ran to her with ideas now hesitated, glancing over their shoulders as if seeking Penny's approval first. Even the press began to shift. Headlines hailed Penny as the visionary founder of NovaSphere, erasing Gianna's name from the story. At the Tech Vision Summit, a journalist asked Penny, "What inspired you to create NovaSphere?" Penny launched into a tale of humble beginnings, hardship, and ambition, never once mentioning Gianna's role. Gianna watched from the crowd, her fists clenched in her lap. Every omission was another cut, small but deliberate. The breaking point came during a critical funding round. Gianna had spent weeks preparing the financial deck, ensuring every metric glowed with promise. But on the morning of the investor pitch, Penny arrived with Victor at her side and casually announced, "We've made some last-minute adjustments." The adjustments gutted Gianna's slides, replacing financial strategy with glossy branding, celebrity endorsements, and projections with no grounding in reality. Gianna's protest was drowned out by Penny's polished delivery. Investors applauded. Contracts were signed. And when Gianna tried to raise her concerns afterward, Penny silenced her with a single cutting remark. "Numbers don't inspire people, Gia. Stories do. That's why they'll always choose me over you." That night, alone in her apartment, Gianna sat staring at the city lights, her reflection pale against the windowpane. For the first time since founding NovaSphere, she wondered if she had already lost the company. And somewhere across town, Penny Dawson and Victor Hale clinked glasses, celebrating quietly. The betrayal had begun, not with daggers, but with whispers, contracts, and a smile that hid a sharpened knife. The trap had been months in the making. Penny Dawson knew Gianna Carter's strengths, and her weaknesses. Gianna was brilliant with numbers, meticulous with financial models, but she hated the tedious jungle of corporate law. To her, contracts were dry, suffocating documents, and she trusted NovaSphere's legal advisor, Victor Hale, to handle them. That trust became the weapon. It started with something small. Victor suggested that NovaSphere update its shareholder agreements to modernize the structure. He framed it as a matter of compliance, a routine adjustment most companies went through after rapid growth. Penny reinforced the idea, telling Gianna, It's just paperwork, Gia. Let Victor streamline it so we don't waste time. Gianna signed the First Amendment without much thought. Nothing seemed alarming, her shares remained intact, her voting rights unchanged. But hidden deep in the language, Victor planted seeds. Clauses that sounded harmless: executive discretion, strategic reallocation, special voting provisions. Each one tilted the balance ever so slightly toward Penny. The second step came during a fundraising round. Investors demanded reassurance of leadership stability. Victor presented a temporary measure granting Penny expanded authority for investor confidence. Penny sweet-talked Gianna into agreeing. "You're the genius behind the curtain," Penny said with a practiced smile. "I'll take the stage, keep the investors calm. This is just symbolic." Gianna, exhausted from weeks of negotiations, relented. She didn't see how the measure, once approved, could later be extended indefinitely. The third step was personal. Penny exploited Gianna's trust. One afternoon, Penny invited Gianna to her office with 2 cups of coffee. She placed a slim folder on the desk. "Routine signatures," she said lightly. "Victor already reviewed everything. It's just to finalize the stock option pool for new hires." Gianna flipped through the pages. The language was dense, technical. She skimmed, focusing on the numbers, which seemed consistent with their earlier discussions. Penny chatted casually about hiring strategies, distracting her from reading closely. At the end of the stack, Gianna signed. She had no idea she had just authorized a reallocation of shares that diluted her equity below controlling threshold. Victor's craftsmanship was meticulous. He disguised the reallocation as a growth pool adjustment, embedding it within annexes and cross-references. Even a trained eye could miss it on a first pass, unless they suspected foul play. But Gianna trusted. And that trust was the crack Penny drove her dagger through. The fourth step was execution. Weeks later, during a board meeting, Gianna raised a financial concern about reckless spending on marketing campaigns Penny had launched without her approval. She expected at least a debate, maybe pushback. Instead, the board voted unanimously in Penny's favor. Confused, Gianna protested, "This is against our agreed terms. I have veto power." Victor adjusted his glasses and slid a document across the table. "Actually, Miss Carter, under the revised agreement, executive discretion rests with the CEO." Gianna's blood ran cold as she scanned the highlighted section. It was her own signature at the bottom. The room blurred around her. From there, the walls closed in. She discovered she no longer had access to certain financial databases. Victor had reclassified them as executive level only. When she attempted to challenge a major hiring decision, Penny reminded her, with a mocking smile, that her voting rights had been reduced to a minority bloc. Even her equity was not safe. Victor unveiled another document, citing the dilution clause Gianna had unknowingly signed. Her stake in NovaSphere had shrunk dramatically, leaving Penny with controlling interest. Gianna sat frozen in her office, the truth crashing down on her like a tidal wave. Piece by piece, she had been maneuvered out of her own company. And the cruelest part? She had handed them the weapons herself. Penny savored the moment. "You were always the brain, Gia," she said one evening, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "But brains don't matter without control. And now, control is mine." Victor stood behind her, silent but satisfied, his eyes gleaming with the precision of a chess master watching the final piece fall into place. The news broke faster than Gianna could process. "NovaSphere CEO leads bold expansion," blared one headline. Another declared, "Penny Dawson, the visionary behind Silicon Valley's rising star." Gianna's name, once inseparable from NovaSphere, was absent, erased as though she had never existed. Sitting alone in her apartment, Gianna scrolled through the articles, each one another knife to the chest. They painted Penny as the genius, the savior, the woman who had defied all odds. Nowhere did they mention the woman who had written the financial blueprints, the strategist who had kept NovaSphere alive when investors wavered. It was as though she had been airbrushed out of history. The humiliation deepened when colleagues she once trusted began to drift away. Engineers who had celebrated milestones with her now avoided eye contact in the hallways. Some sent polite, carefully worded texts, "Sorry about the restructuring, hope you're okay." But most said nothing. Gianna understood. Penny controlled the narrative. Aligning with Gianna meant risking careers. Better to stay close to the new queen than be tainted by the fallen co-founder. The isolation cut deeper than the loss of shares. NovaSphere had been her life's work. Now, it felt like a body she had built, only to watch someone else steal the heartbeat. Financially, the blow was crippling. With her equity diluted and access to company accounts revoked, Gianna's personal savings evaporated quickly. Legal fees mounted as she sought counsel, but Victor had covered his tracks too well. Every lawyer she consulted gave the same response: "You signed the documents." Challenging them would take years, and even then, your chances are slim. Victor's genius was not in what he wrote, but in how he disguised it. Every trap had been cloaked in legal legitimacy. Gianna had signed her own downfall, line by line. The logic was airtight. She wasn't just outmaneuvered, she was boxed in. Worse still was the public perception. Penny launched a PR campaign portraying herself as the tireless founder who had carried NovaSphere on her back. Interviews were filled with anecdotes about her early struggles, her vision, her fearless leadership. And then came the whispers. Rumors circulated that Gianna had been difficult, risk-averse, even obstructive. Some blogs claimed she had failed to adapt, or that she had voluntarily stepped down. Gianna wanted to scream. None of it was true. But in the court of public opinion, silence was guilt, and Penny owned the microphone. Friends who had once cheered her success now treated her like a cautionary tale. At networking events, conversations fell silent when she entered the room. Some looked at her with pity, others with suspicion. Had she really sabotaged her own company? Had she been too weak to lead? The betrayal wasn't just corporate. It was social, personal, existential. At home, the collapse became tangible. Her once busy phone now sat silent on the counter. Calls that used to pour in from investors, reporters, and employees had stopped. The apartment, spacious and modern, felt cavernous without the constant hum of work. Nights stretched into mornings, sleepless, her mind replaying every signature, every meeting she had missed, every moment she had trusted Penny. The logic of her downfall replayed like a cruel equation. The final blow came in the form of a letter. Delivered by courier, it bore NovaSphere's logo at the top. Notice of termination, effective immediately, all titles and access privileges granted to Ms. Gianna Carter are revoked. Her throat tightened as she read the words. She wasn't just deluded or sidelined. She was gone. Hours later, she tried to swipe her badge at the NovaSphere building. The scanner blinked red. Security guards, men she once greeted daily, shook their heads with rehearsed sympathy. "Sorry, Miss Carter. You're no longer on the list." Her world collapsed on a sidewalk outside the company she had built. The same glass tower that had once glowed with promise now reflected back her defeat. Penny's timing was merciless. That very evening, she hosted a gala at the Four Seasons to celebrate NovaSphere's next chapter. Photographs of her in a glittering gown, flanked by Victor and smiling investors, flooded social media. Gianna saw one image that froze her blood, Penny holding a champagne glass aloft, captioned with the words, "To new beginnings." It wasn't just victory. It was triumph at her expense. Yet, in the quiet aftermath, as Gianna sat on her floor surrounded by scattered papers, something stirred beneath the devastation. Her eyes landed on a folder she had taken home months earlier, financial reports Victor had overlooked when revoking her access. She opened it absently, scanning columns of numbers, until a discrepancy caught her attention. It was small, subtle, but unmistakable. Her breath quickened. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of something other than despair. The folder sat on Gianna's coffee table like a forgotten relic. For days, it had been buried beneath unopened mail and crumpled newspapers, another reminder of a life that had slipped out of her control. But tonight, something compelled her to open it. Inside were quarterly financial reports, spreadsheets, and expense breakdowns. At first glance, everything looked ordinary. But Gianna's mind, trained to see patterns where others saw noise, caught an inconsistency almost immediately. The numbers didn't add up. A marketing campaign Penny had boasted about, an extravagant, multi-city event that supposedly cost $3.2 million, showed duplicate invoices from two shell companies Gianna had never seen before. The names were generic, almost laughably so, Blue Horizon Consulting and Eastgate Partners. When she cross-checked addresses, both led to the same P.O. box in Nevada. Her pulse quickened. It could have been sloppy bookkeeping. But Gianna knew Victor Hale didn't make sloppy mistakes. Which meant this wasn't a mistake at all, it was a cover. The more she dug, the clearer the picture became. Vendor contracts with suspiciously round numbers, $500,000 here, $750,000 there, filed without competitive bidding. Travel expenses reimbursed for trips that didn't exist, marked executive development retreats. Payments to consultants who appeared nowhere on the payroll. Each detail by itself could be explained away. But together, they formed a web. Money was being siphoned out of NovaSphere under the guise of legitimate expenses. Penny wasn't just greedy. She was laundering company funds to sustain her glittering lifestyle and lock in political favors. Gianna sat back, the weight of the discovery pressing against her chest. It wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was crime. For the first time since her downfall, she felt a spark of power. Still, caution clawed at her. Victor Hale had crafted these documents. If she found this trail, others could too, but no one had, which meant Victor had contingency plans. Gianna knew better than to march into battle without armor. She opened her laptop and began cross-referencing. Old bank records, vendor names, even scraps of internal emails she had archived months earlier. Piece by piece, the puzzle sharpened. There it was again, Blue Horizon Consulting. This time tied to a $1.1 million cybersecurity audit that had supposedly taken place 3 months earlier. She knew every contractor NovaSphere had ever hired, and none matched this invoice. It was fraud. Clean, deliberate, systematic fraud. But what chilled her most was a single email buried in her archives. It was from Penny, sent late at night, forwarded through Victor's account. The subject line was casual, "Make sure this goes through," but the attachment was one of the fraudulent contracts. The implications were clear. Penny wasn't just complicit. She was orchestrating it. Gianna leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The woman who had once shared pizza with her in a cramped apartment while they dreamed of changing the world was now stealing from their own creation. And Victor, the man who had wrapped his traps in airtight contracts, had left fingerprints too. His initials appeared in approval stamps across the documents. They thought she was gone. They thought she was powerless. But they had underestimated the one thing Gianna still possessed, her mind. For days, she lived in the numbers. She stopped answering calls, stopped leaving her apartment, surviving on cold coffee and half-eaten takeout containers. Her desk was littered with printouts marked in red pen, arrows connecting accounts, circles around dates that didn't line up. The deeper she went, the darker it grew. Millions had already disappeared. And if her calculations were right, Penny and Victor were preparing to drain even more, disguised as an international expansion fund. If it went through, NovaSphere would be hollowed out, and the board would never know until it was too late. Gianna faced a choice. She could take what she had and go public, hand the files to a journalist, a regulator, anyone who would listen. But she knew Victor would bury her with legal threats, smear campaigns, maybe even criminal countersuits. She needed more. Something irrefutable. The breakthrough came from an unlikely place. One night, while sifting through old access logs she had saved on a portable drive, she noticed unusual activity tied to Victor's account. He had accessed offshore banking databases through NovaSphere's VPN. That was far beyond his legal role. With her last remaining contact in IT, a junior engineer who still respected her, Gianna confirmed her suspicions. "These aren't random logins," he whispered nervously over the phone. "He's routing money. But if anyone finds out I told you, you're safe," Gianna assured him. But inside, her resolve hardened. She finally had a thread that could unravel Victor's entire scheme. Alone in her darkened apartment, Gianna spread the documents across her dining table. Fraudulent invoices. Offshore accounts. Complicit emails. For weeks, she had drowned in despair, stripped of her company, her friends, her reputation. But now, she had something even more powerful than shares or titles. She had the truth. And if she played it right, the truth would be a blade sharper than any betrayal.
Part 2 is still on the channel. Please watch and follow.